The night was quiet, but inside a small apartment in Southern California, something dangerous was about to happen. Weapons lay on the floor. Maps were spread across a table. The men inside spoke in low voices, their words filled with hate, fear, and belief in a violent cause. They were not just criminals planning a robbery. They believed they were soldiers in a holy war. Their goal was clear: rob, kill if needed, and use the money to fuel terror. What made this moment even more shocking was where it all began. This plan was not born on the streets. It started behind prison walls. As police closed in, unaware of how close these men were to carrying out mass violence, one question hung in the air. How did a simple prison sentence turn into a terror plot aimed at America itself? That answer began years earlier inside a California prison. Kevin James was already serving time when he started something far more dangerous than the crime that put him behind bars. While locked up, James created a group he called Jam'iyyat Ul-Islam Is-Saheeh, known as JIS. To other inmates, it looked like a religious study group. To James, it was something else entirely. It was a future terror cell. Inside prison, James preached a strict and violent message. He told other inmates that America was the enemy. He said violence was not just allowed, but required. Many inmates were young, angry, and searching for purpose. James offered them that purpose. Slowly, he gathered followers. Prison officials did not see the full danger at first. Groups like this had appeared before and faded away. But JIS did not fade. It grew stronger. When James was released from prison, his influence did not end, it expanded. Outside, former inmates stayed loyal to him and to the message he had drilled into them. One of them was LeVar Washington. Washington believed deeply in JIS ideology and was willing to act on it. He and others began talking about real targets, real weapons, and real attacks. But there was a problem. Terror plans need money. That is where crime came in. The group decided they would fund their terror mission through armed robberies. They planned to rob gas stations and other businesses across Southern California. The money would be used to buy weapons, supplies, and support future attacks. To them, robbery was not just a crime, it was part of their mission. They trained for violence. They practiced shooting. They talked about killing police officers, military members, and civilians if necessary. Each robbery was meant to bring them closer to something much worse. At the same time, federal authorities were beginning to notice signs of danger. Informants came forward. Conversations were overheard. Slowly, the picture became clear. This was not just a robbery crew. This was a terror cell. The FBI began watching closely. In 2005, the danger reached a breaking point. Washington carried out an armed robbery at a gas station. During the crime, a police officer was shot and seriously injured. The shooting confirmed what investigators feared. These men were ready to spill blood. Now, law enforcement knew time was running out. As agents rushed to stop the group, they uncovered more disturbing plans. The JIS cell had talked about attacking military bases, Jewish synagogues, and other public places. Their robberies were only the first step. Something much bigger was coming.
The arrests came just in time. Federal agents moved fast, arresting Washington and other members of the group. Weapons were seized, plans were exposed. The terror plot was stopped before innocent lives were lost on a massive scale. In court, prosecutors showed how JIS used crime to support terror. They explained how the group blurred the line between street violence and ideological extremism. The jury heard how a prison-born movement had nearly turned into a deadly attack on American soil. Kevin James was sentenced to life in prison. Other members received long sentences as well. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of what could have happened became clear. But even after the verdicts, one truth remained unsettling. This entire plot began in a prison, hidden in plain sight. And as the prison doors closed behind the convicted men, officials were left asking a chilling question. If one terror group could grow this way, how many others might already be forming, waiting for their moment? That question would haunt law enforcement long after the case was over. The prison doors slammed shut, and the sound echoed down the long concrete hallway. Inside those walls, life moved slowly. Days blended into nights. For most inmates, prison was a place to survive, not to dream. But for Kevin James, prison was a place to build something dangerous. The real threat did not begin with guns or robberies. It began with words. Inside the prison, James spoke calmly and confidently. He did not shout or act wild. He listened first. He watched other inmates closely, searching for men who felt lost, angry, or broken. Many were serving long sentences. Many felt forgotten by the world outside. James offered them something powerful: meaning. He told them they were not criminals. He said they were warriors chosen for a higher purpose. He spoke about religion, but twisted it into something dark. He taught that violence was holy and that America was evil. Slowly, inmates began to listen. Slowly, they began to believe. JIS meetings looked harmless on the surface. A small group of men sitting together, talking quietly. Prison guards saw groups like this all the time, but behind the calm faces, dangerous ideas were being planted. James warned his followers to be careful. He told them not to talk openly about violence. He taught them to use code words. He explained how to avoid attention. This made JIS harder to detect than prison gangs that relied on tattoos or loud displays of power. As time passed, loyalty grew stronger. The group became disciplined. Members were taught to obey orders and trust only each other. James made it clear that prison was just the beginning. The real mission would start after release. When James finally left prison, his followers stayed behind, but his voice remained. Letters were sent, messages were passed quietly. The belief system stayed alive. Outside prison, LeVar Washington became the most dangerous believer. Washington took James's teachings seriously. To him, JIS was not just an idea, it was a call to action. He gathered former inmates and trusted friends. They met in apartments, garages, and quiet corners of the city. Their talks turned from belief to planning. At first, the plans were small. They spoke about survival, about protecting themselves. But soon, the talk changed. Targets were named. Anger grew. The group began to believe violence was coming no matter what, so they should strike first. Money was always a problem. Weapons cost money. Ammunition cost money. Travel cost money. That is when Washington suggested robberies. He said stealing from businesses was allowed because the money would serve their cause. Some members hesitated. Others agreed quickly. Once the first robbery plan was made, there was no turning back. They practiced with guns. They learned how to move fast and scare victims into silence. They planned escape routes. Every detail mattered. This was no random crime. It was organized and purposeful. The first robberies were meant to be tests, quick hits, easy money. But with each crime, confidence grew. So did violence. Federal investigators were watching quietly. Informants inside the group had begun to talk. They described the beliefs, the meetings, and the growing danger. The FBI listened closely. They knew this was more than street crime. This was a terror network forming right in front of them. Agents faced a hard choice. Move too early and they might not have enough proof. Wait too long and innocent lives could die. Then came the gas station robbery. Washington entered the store armed and ready. The robbery went wrong fast. Police arrived sooner than expected. In seconds, gunfire erupted. A police officer was shot and nearly killed. Blood stained the pavement. Sirens filled the night.
This was the moment everything changed. For investigators, the shooting confirmed the worst fears. The JIS cell was no longer planning violence.
They were already committing it. After the shooting, pressure increased. Surveillance tightened. Phone calls were tracked. Meetings were monitored. Agents uncovered chilling conversations about future attacks. The group talked about military bases. They talked about religious buildings. They talked about killing without mercy. The robberies were only the beginning. Behind the scenes, Kevin James continued to guide the group, even from prison. His words shaped their thinking. His influence pushed them forward. He reminded them that sacrifice was part of the mission. Arrests began quietly. One by one, members were taken into custody. Weapons were found. Written plans were seized. The full scope of the plot finally came into view. Prosecutors later described JIS as a bridge between crime and terror. The robberies were not random. They were designed to fund mass violence. This made the case one of the most disturbing domestic terror plots tied to prison radicalization. In court, victims listened as the plans were read aloud. Jurors heard how close the group came to carrying out attacks that could have killed many people. Families of the wounded officers sat silently, realizing how different life could have been. Yet, even as sentences were handed down, one troubling fact remained. JIS had been stopped, but the method that created it still existed. Prisons across the country held thousands of angry, lost inmates. Guards were overworked, monitoring was limited. Extremist ideas could still spread quietly, just as they had before. And as Kevin James returned to a prison cell for life, officials wondered whether his teachings would truly die with him or whether someone else would take his place. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentences. Long years, life behind bars. The words echoed, heavy and final. For the victims and their families, there was relief. For law enforcement, there was pride in stopping a deadly plot. But beneath that relief sat a deep fear. The JIS case was over, yet the problem it exposed was far from solved. Because the real danger did not end with prison doors closing. Kevin James was sent back to prison to serve a life sentence. He was placed under strict controls. His letters were watched. His calls were limited. Guards were warned. Officials believed that by isolating him, his influence would fade. But influence is not always loud. Sometimes it survives in ideas already planted. Inside prison, rumors spread fast. Inmates talked. Some knew James by name. Others knew his story. To a few, he became a symbol, not a hero, but proof that one man could turn belief into action. Prison officials increased monitoring of religious groups. Chaplains were trained to spot warning signs. Guards were taught to watch for coded language in secret meetings. Still, prisons are crowded places. Silence is hard to control. Outside prison, the damage of JIS lingered. Investigators worked to track anyone who had crossed paths with the group. Some former associates were questioned. Others were watched quietly. The FBI expanded its focus on how extremist groups use common crime to fund terror. Robbery, fraud, and theft were no longer seen as separate from terrorism. They were part of the same chain. The wounded police officer survived, but life was never the same. Recovery took months. Pain lingered. The attack became a reminder of how fast a simple crime can turn into something much worse. One bad decision, one belief pushed too far, one moment of violence that could not be undone. Experts began to study the case closely. They saw a pattern. Radical ideas did not appear overnight. They grew slowly, fed by anger, isolation, and false promises. Prison gave those ideas time and space. When released, believers returned to the world with plans, not hope. The JIS case became a warning taught in training rooms across the country. It showed how terror does not always come from foreign lands or secret camps. Sometimes it starts in a cell with nothing but words and time. But not everyone agreed on how to respond. Some argued that stricter controls were needed, more surveillance, fewer group meetings.
Others warned that pushing too hard could make things worse. They feared that cutting off religious expression could drive beliefs deeper underground, making them harder to detect. The balance was fragile. Meanwhile, former JIS members sat in federal prisons, scattered across the system. They were separated from each other to prevent coordination. Their communications were watched closely. Officials hoped distance would weaken loyalty, but loyalty built on belief does not break easily.
Years passed. New inmates arrived. Old ones left. The prison system kept moving. On the surface, the danger seemed quiet. No new attacks, no new robberies tied to JIS. Some believed the threat was gone. Others were not so sure. Intelligence reports continued to warn that extremist groups learn from failure. They adapt. They study past mistakes. The JIS plot showed them what worked and what did not. It showed them how crime could bring fast money and how prison recruitment could build trust. The fear was not that JIS would return. The fear was that someone else would copy it. Across the country, law enforcement began sharing information more closely. Prison staff worked with federal agents. Small warning signs were taken more seriously. A quiet meeting, a strange letter, a sudden shift in behavior. Every detail mattered now. Still, no system is perfect. Late one night, a prison guard walked a quiet hallway, keys rattling softly. Inside one cell, an inmate sat on his bunk, writing carefully on a scrap of paper. No weapons, no maps, just words. Outside the bars, everything looked calm, but history had already shown how dangerous words could be. The JIS plot proved that terror does not always explode without warning. Sometimes it grows slowly, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to move from thought to action. And as America continued its fight against extremism, one truth remained clear. Stopping one group does not stop the idea. The prison was quiet, but silence did not mean safety. Long after the JIS case faded from headlines, its shadow remained inside correctional walls across America. Guards walked their rounds. Inmates slept, argued, prayed, and waited. Life inside continued as it always had. Yet officials now knew something they could never forget. Danger does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with patience. After JIS was dismantled, federal agencies changed how they watched prisons. Intelligence units were expanded. Staff received special training to spot early signs of radical thinking, a sudden change in language, a small group separating itself from others, messages that sounded peaceful on the surface but carried hidden meaning underneath. These details now mattered more than ever. But even with new rules, the system had limits. Prisons are overcrowded. Guards are stretched thin. Thousands of inmates come and go every year. Among them are people who feel angry, lost, or broken. These emotions are powerful. Extremist ideas feed on them. That was the lesson JIS left behind. Kevin James remained locked away, isolated from the world he once tried to change through violence. He no longer planned robberies or attacks, but the ideas he spread could not be locked up so easily. Once an idea is learned, it lives inside a person. That truth troubled investigators more than any weapon ever could.
Across the country, experts debated how to stop the next JIS before it formed. Some believed education was the key, teaching inmates critical thinking, offering real paths forward. Others believed strict control was the only answer. Fewer freedoms, more monitoring, less opportunity for secret influence. There was no perfect solution. Outside prison walls, communities continued their lives, unaware of how close danger once came. Gas stations reopened, streets stayed busy, families moved on. Most people would never know that armed robberies were once meant to pay for terror attacks against their own neighborhoods. That was the most frightening part. Terror does not always look like terror at first. It can look like crime. It can look like belief. It can look like a group of men talking quietly in a room, convinced they are right. The JIS plot proved that the line between crime and terrorism can disappear. Robbery becomes funding. Belief becomes violence. Prison becomes a training ground. And yet, the story did not end in failure. Lives were saved. Attacks were stopped. Officers survived. Justice was served. Law enforcement learned, adapted, and improved. The system bent, but it did not break. Still, the warning remains. Every prison holds stories we will never hear. Every cell holds a person capable of choosing a path forward or a path toward destruction. The difference often begins with one voice, one idea, one moment of influence. The JIS case reminds us that vigilance does not end when a sentence is handed down. It begins there. Because the next threat may not announce itself. It may already be waiting, silent and unseen behind steel doors. If this story opened your eyes to how real danger can grow in the shadows, don't stop here. Subscribe now for more true stories that reveal what's hidden behind prison walls, untold investigations, and real crimes that almost changed America forever. Stay informed, stay aware, and join us for the next story before it's too late.